Toronto's housing crisis. Everyone's talking about supply, but what if the real problem isn't that we aren't building enough homes, it's that we aren't building the right ones? So let's think about it. If we go over to Germany, 50% of Berliners rent for life. If we look over in Japan and Tokyo, families rent long-term and no one bats an eye. And then over in Vienna, they've been solving affordability for decades with rentals, not homeownership. But meanwhile, here in Ontario, we've built a system that makes it feel like if you don't own, you're losing. But owning a home right now, it comes with six-figure down payments, maintenance and repair bills rising with inflation, and interest rates that stretch your wallet like a rubber band. So maybe it's time we asked, is renting actually the smarter move right now? Because the future of housing might not look like a mortgage in a driveway. It actually might look like a well-managed fourplex with your name on the lease and not the deed. So if you're watching this on Instagram or TikTok, head over to our YouTube channel for the full breakdown. And before I get into it, I want to ask you, do you think Toronto's future development should focus more on rentals? Drop a comment below and let's start the conversation. And then if you're already watching this on YouTube, stick around because by the end of this video, we might just change your mind on renting. Okay, so first off, let's look at the rest of the globe. So like I said in the intro, in Berlin, 84% of residents rent. In Vienna, it's 78%. And in Tokyo, most families don't own their homes. And even if we go just to the south of us in New York, our closest neighbors, just 30% of people own. So renting isn't failure, it's normal. And these cities prove you can build long-term community and economic stability without ownership. In Vienna, people live their entire lives in nonprofit rentals with rent caps. In Tokyo, most new construction keeps supply flowing. In Berlin and NYC, large institutions own and manage properties with long-term leases. So some cities treat rentals as infrastructure. However, in Canada, we just treat it like a waiting room for ownership. But here's the question. Why are we still pushing home ownership so hard, even when it's out of reach for most people? And more importantly, who's supposed to build the kind of rentals people actually need? So let's talk about the real players moving behind the scenes, because here's the truth. If governments won't build enough rental housing, then someone else will. And right now, that someone is wearing a suit and working out of a boardroom. So let's talk about the big bad boogeyman of institutional landlords. So when people hear the word REIT, which is a real estate investment trust or pension fund, they imagine a faceless investor profiting off working families. And in some cases, that concern is valid. We've seen rent evictions, we've seen bad actors, but let's not throw the whole system out without looking at what's really going on. So big players like pension funds and REITs bring something rare in real estate, and that's stability. So they're not just flippers and they don't care about short-term hype. They're in it usually for decades. This means predictable rents, professional maintenance, and less fear that your landlord is going to just sell your unit tomorrow. So if we think about it, would you rather rent from someone who manages 10,000 units with on-call repair staff, or someone who owns one house and gets cold feet when interest rates rise? But here's where it gets a little complicated. When institutional investors start buying up single-family homes, especially in tight markets like here in Toronto, they do push out individual buyers. So if we look at places like in the US and Atlanta, institutional investors made up over 40% of home buyers at one point. That's pretty wild, and it raises real concerns about competition, pricing, and power. But again, it's not who is buying, it's why they're buying. So if we incentivize institutional capital to build new multifamily rentals, it's not just buying existing family homes, they could actually be part of the solution. So the next question is, where do we put all this new rental housing? Because right now in most cities across Ontario, you legally can't build anything other than a detached house, and that's a real problem. So if we zoom out on a map of the GTA, so if we look at Toronto, Mississauga, or Hamilton, you'll see kilometers and kilometers of what the housing and development community calls the Yellowbelt. So it's this residential zone where you can pretty much only build detached, semi-detached houses. So the translation, you can build a 4,000 square foot McMansion, but not a triplex. And This is what planners call the missing middle. It's the low-rise multifamily housing that exists between skyscrapers and single-family homes. And we've pretty much spent the last 50 years banning it. But there's good news, and that's starting to change. And if you're looking for more info on the missing middle, I want to shout out my colleague Nate Chu. I put his Instagram link in the description down below. Check out his channel. He does a lot of great work on missing middle and gives you a pretty good explanation of what it is. Now let's look at some examples of what's working. So in the city of Toronto, they've just recently legalized fourplexes citywide, and Vancouver is legalizing sixplexes on large lots. We've also seen garden suites and laneway homes starting to become mainstream. And then, really all over the world, if we look at Oregon, California, New Zealand, they're making moves to legalize this missing middle, this gentle density. These aren't just zoning tweaks. They're tools to unlock rental supply in neighborhoods that were previously off limits. So that backyard suite, it could be housing for your aging parent, your 20-something kid, or a young family starting out. So this is how you build affordable rentals without building towers just everywhere. So it's quietly, carefully, and sustainably. But even if we legalize and build all of this gentle density, there's still a cultural hurdle because too many of us still think that if you're renting, you're behind. So let's unpack where that belief comes from and why it might be the one thing that's holding us back when we're trying to address the affordability crisis. So we've been sold a story that homeownership equals success, that renting means you're failing at adulthood. But let's keep it real. When the average detached home in Toronto costs well over $1.3 million and most other housing types like semis and townhouses are still well over that $1 million threshold, this story of homeownership starts to sound like a fairy tale. And actually, 84% of Canadians say homeownership now feels like a luxury, and 88% of renters think that it's out of reach. And still, the narrative just doesn't shift. We're going through an election right now, and politicians still say we've got to help young people buy. But what if young people don't want a mortgage? What if they just want stability? So let's break it down further. Owning isn't always wealth. We have to remember that houses depreciate, maintenance costs rise, and interest will eat away at some of that equity you build up. Renting gives flexibility, fewer responsibilities, and in some cases, it actually does give you better financial outcomes. So many Gen Z and millennials aren't necessarily waiting to buy anymore. They're choosing to rent intentionally. And also, the whole throwing away money myth, it really needs to die. Because if the only way to feel secure is to sign up for 25 years of debt, something's broken. Renting isn't the problem. It's our refusal to treat renters like equals. So if we normalize renting, we free people to live how they need to, not just how tradition tells them to. So let's bring this all home, because if we're serious about solving this housing crisis, we need to stop looking at it through the lens of ownership only. So the housing crisis in Ontario specifically isn't just about too few homes. It's about too few rental options, especially the kind that let you stay, raise a family, and build a life. We need more units, but we also need a new mindset. One that says renting isn't shameful, institutional landlords aren't automatically the enemy, and ownership isn't the only version of success. So Vienna figured this out, and Tokyo built their way out of scarcity. Berlin's figuring out how to balance power, and we can do the same, because this isn't about abandoning the dream, it's about expanding the definition of home. So if you've ever felt like renting made you less than, drop a comment. I want to hear your story. And if you're a builder, a planner, or a policymaker, send this video to your team and let's rethink what housing can be. And then lastly, if you want help navigating this market, whether it's renting, owning, or investing in one of these multiplexes, hit me up. My contact info is in the description down below. So thanks again for watching. And if you're new to this channel, please like the video and subscribe if you're ready for real estate content that actually respects your intelligence. So that's it for now. Peace out.